In a small coastal community, certain cases refuse to fade into the archive. They linger in the minds of those who first opened the file, who walked the scene, who felt the weight of unanswered questions. For Chief of Police Carrie Hollis, one name has echoed through her career for over a decade. Eve Shay, a teenage girl who vanished on Independence Day. A body recovered weeks later from the ocean, a ruling of accidental drowning that never satisfied those who knew the details. And after 15 years of following dead ends and cold trails, just as Hollis prepared to finally close the file, a single phone call changed everything. Case background. Carrie Hollis oversees a police department that handles the full spectrum of criminal investigations, missing persons reports, unidentified remains, closed cases, and those that remain frustratingly open. Some files date back a decade and a half. The work is meticulous, often thankless, and demands a level of compartmentalization that few can sustain over an entire career. Among the hundreds of cases that have crossed her desk, the disappearance of Eve Shay stands apart. It is not simply another file. Eve was Hollis's childhood friend. They grew up together in this same coastal town, part of a close trio that included a third girl named Brooke Lowry. The three were inseparable during their adolescent years, sharing the kind of bond that small-town childhoods often forge. On the 4th of July, 15 years ago, Eve disappeared. She was last seen near a pier that housed a local arcade called the Cosmos. The circumstances were immediately concerning no indication of where she might have gone. No witnesses who saw her leave, no evidence of foul play, but equally, no clear explanation for her sudden absence. For weeks, the investigation yielded nothing. No physical evidence emerged. No credible witnesses came forward. No suspects were identified. The case seemed to evaporate into the summer heat. Then, weeks after her disappearance, Eve's body was discovered, washed ashore. The official cause of death was determined to be accidental drowning. The case was effectively closed by authorities at that time, but Carrie Hollis never accepted that conclusion. For 15 years, she has returned to the file, reviewed the evidence, retraced the timeline. The pursuit has taken a toll on her personal life, strained relationships, and consumed her professional focus. She has considered, more than once, whether it might be time to accept the official ruling and move on. Crime discovery on July 1, 2025, exactly 15 years and 27 days after Evie's disappearance. A routine tip came through the East Bay Police Department hotline. The call was recorded and initially handled by a junior officer named Jamie Bender, recently hired and still learning department protocol. Standard procedure dictated that such tips be reviewed and filtered by more experienced staff before reaching the chief's desk. Bender, unfamiliar with this particular case's history and the sensitivities surrounding it, passed the recording directly to Hollis. The caller had used inexpensive voice-altering software, resulting in distorted audio that was difficult to parse. But the message, though muddled, was clear enough in its intent. The anonymous individual claimed to possess new information regarding the girl who disappeared from the pier near the Cosmos arcade. For Hollis, the message was impossible to ignore. It lodged itself in her thoughts, refusing to be dismissed as just another false lead or attention-seeking hoax. Something about the specificity, the mention of the pier, the arcade adaged that the caller possessed genuine knowledge of the case. Within days of that phone call, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A fishing vessel operating off the coast hauled in a grim discovery: a man's body entangled in their nets. The remains were brought to shore and examined. The death was quickly classified as a homicide. During the subsequent investigation into this separate murder, detectives uncovered a connection to a location several miles, a private, secluded establishment known as the 4 Points Hotel. The property was designed for privacy, tucked away in dense woods, far from the tourist areas along the coast. As investigators examined records and interviewed potential witnesses connected to the hotel, another name surfaced: Brooke Lowry, Carrie Hollis's estranged childhood friend, the third member of their adolescent trio. Brooke had moved away from the coastal town many years earlier, but records indicated she had been at the 4 Points Hotel on a specific night, the same night that now appeared connected to the murdered man. The revelation that Brooke Lowry had been present at the 4 Points Hotel created an immediate complication. According to the evidence gathered, Brooke had not been alone. She had been in one of the hotel's cottages with a man, her husband. David, her companion that night, was her lover. The two had maintained a secret relationship for approximately 3 months, using the remote hotel as a discreet meeting place. The hotel's design facilitated such arrangements. Each cottage was soundproofed and isolated, offering guests absolute privacy. In all their previous visits, Brooke and David had never heard any indication of other occupants nearby. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds of doors or bottles opening. But on this particular night, that changed. As they occupied their room in the third cottage, sounds began to emerge from the adjacent space. At first, the voices were indistinct. Then they grew louder, more agitated. What Brooke and David overheard suggested a violent confrontation. According to Brooks' later account, the exchange they heard included phrases like, "Stop it, you're crazy. Get your hands off of me, and you're the one who made me crazy." The voices escalated, then fell silent, then resumed. The pattern suggested a physical struggle. Both Brooke and David froze, uncertain how to respond. They understood immediately that intervening would mean revealing their presence at the hotel and, by extension, their affair. David was married. Brooke was married. Neither could afford the exposure that would come from contacting authorities or hotel management. They made a decision that night to say nothing, to leave the hotel as planned, and never mention what they had heard. They told themselves it might have been nothing, that they could have misinterpreted the situation, that getting involved would only create complications without necessarily helping anyone. When the body was pulled from the water, days later, and investigators traced the crime back to the Four Points Hotel, Brooke found herself in an impossible position. She possessed information that might be relevant to a murder investigation, but providing that information would require admitting she had been at the scene of revelation that would destroy her marriage and her carefully maintained life. Meanwhile, Carrie Hollis began to notice the connections forming. A new tip about Eve, a murder linked to a hotel, the unexpected reappearance of her childhood friend Brooke in the context of a criminal investigation. The threads seemed separate at first, but as Hollis dug deeper, patterns emerged that suggested these events were not isolated incidents. Evidence. The investigation into the murdered man revealed several key pieces of evidence. First, the physical condition of the body indicated he had been deceased for several days before being discovered. The manner of death was consistent with homicide, though specific details about the method were not immediately released to the public. Second, the timeline investigators established placed the victim at the Four Points Hotel on the night Brooke and David were also present. Room records, though incomplete due to the hotel's privacy-focused policies, supported this connection. Third, forensic analysis of the hotel room, where the violent confrontation allegedly occurred, yielded physical evidence consistent with a struggle. The exact nature of this evidence was not disclosed, but it was sufficient to convince investigators that a serious altercation had taken place in that space. The anonymous tip that had reignited interest in Eve Shay's case presented its own evidentiary challenges. The voice alteration made identification of the caller impossible through traditional audio analysis. However, the information provided in the call demonstrated specific knowledge about Eve's disappearance tales that had never been released to the public. This suggested the caller either had direct involvement in the events of 15 years ago, or had obtained information from someone who did. As Hollis reviewed the old evidence from Eve's case alongside the new developments, she began to identify potential connections. The location of Eve's last known sighting, the pier near the Cosmos Arcade, was not far from the Four Points Hotel when one considered travel by water rather than by road. The river that ran past the hotel eventually connected to the coastal area where Eve's body had been recovered. The original investigation into Eve's death had focused primarily on the theory of accidental drowning, particularly after her body was found in the ocean. But Hollis had always questioned whether sufficient attention had been paid to other possibilities. The lack of witnesses at the arcade that night had been attributed to the holiday crowds and the distraction of fireworks. But it also meant that Eve could have left with someone, voluntarily or otherwise, without anyone noticing. Suspects. As the investigation expanded to encompass both the recent murder and the 15-year-old disappearance of Eve Shay, several individuals came under scrutiny. However, Carrie Hollis proceeded carefully, understanding that her personal connection to the case required her to maintain strict professional objectivity. Brooke Lowry occupied a complicated position in the investigation. She was a witness to sounds that might be connected to the recent murder, but she had also withheld this information initially. Her relationship to both Hollis and Eve created additional layers of complexity. Investigators needed to determine whether Brooke's reluctance to come forward was solely due to her desire to protect her marriage, or whether there were other motivations at play. David, Brooke's lover, faced similar scrutiny. Like Brooke, he had heard the violent confrontation at the hotel, but had chosen silence. His background, his relationship with Brooke, and any possible connections to either victim required thorough examination. The identity of the person who made the anonymous tip remained unknown. This individual clearly possessed information about Eve's disappearance, but had chosen to remain hidden behind voice-altering technology. Investigators considered various possibilities. Someone with direct knowledge who feared self-incrimination, a witness who had remained silent for 15 years but now felt compelled to speak, or even someone attempting to manipulate the investigation for reasons not yet understood. The murdered man himself required investigation. Who was he? What brought him to the Four Points Hotel that night? Did he have any connection to Eve Shay, to the coastal town, or to any of the people in Carrie Hollis's life? These questions drove a significant portion of the investigative effort. As the case developed, Hollis found herself examining not just the evidence in front of her, but also her own memories. She, Brooke, and Eve had been close friends during a formative period of their lives. Had there been tensions she had missed, secrets among the trio that she had been blind to? The personal nature of the case made objectivity challenging, but Hollis remained determined to follow the evidence wherever it led. Court police action. The investigation proceeded through multiple phases, each revealing new layers of complexity. As more evidence was gathered and witness statements were taken, the case began to move toward potential criminal proceedings. Brooke Lowry eventually provided a formal statement to investigators, detailing what she and David had heard at the Four Points Hotel. Her testimony, while delayed by her initial reluctance, became a crucial element in establishing the timeline of events that night. However, her credibility was questioned due to her failure to report what she had witnessed immediately. Prosecutors and investigators had to weigh the value of her information against the circumstances under which it was finally provided. David's statement corroborated Brooke's account of the sounds they had heard. However, neither could provide visual identification of the people in the adjacent room or offer definitive evidence about what had actually occurred beyond what they had heard through the wall. The forensic evidence from the hotel room proved more substantial, while specific details remained protected by the ongoing investigation. Authorities indicated that the physical evidence supported the theory that a violent confrontation had indeed taken place in that location, and that this confrontation was connected to the murder victim pulled from the water. As investigators continued to examine possible connections between the recent murder and Eve Shay's 15-year-old disappearance, they faced significant challenges. 15 years had passed. Physical evidence from that time was limited and degraded. Witnesses' memories had faded or become unreliable. The original investigation had concluded with a ruling of accidental drowning, meaning certain investigative avenues had never been fully explored at the time. The anonymous tip that had started this new phase of investigation remained a frustrating element. Despite efforts to trace the call, identify the voice behind the alteration, or find any digital fingerprints that might reveal the caller's identity, law enforcement was unable to determine who had placed that call or what motivated them to come forward after so many years. Unanswered questions. Despite the progress made in the investigation, numerous questions remained unresolved. The connection between the recent murder at the Four Points Hotel and Eve Shay's disappearance 15 years earlier was suggested by circumstantial evidence and timing, but no definitive link had been established. The possibility remained that these were separate incidents, brought together by coincidence and the renewed attention to an old case. The identity and motivation of the anonymous caller continued to puzzle investigators. Why come forward now, after 15 years of silence? What prompted this person to finally provide information, and why do so anonymously rather than speaking directly with police? The answers to these questions might unlock crucial aspects of the case, but they remain frustratingly out of reach. Brooke Lowry's role in the events also raised questions beyond her testimony about what she heard at the hotel. As one of Eve's closest childhood friends, did she possess other information about Eve's state of mind, her relationships, or her activities in the days before her disappearance? Had there been tensions in the friendship that might be relevant? The years of estrangement between Brooke and Carrie meant that conversations that might once have flowed easily were now complicated by distance, secrecy, and suspicion. The original investigation's conclusion, accidental drowning, had been based on the evidence available at that time and the absence of clear indicators of foul play. But was that conclusion correct? Had investigators 15 years ago missed something crucial, or had they been influenced by assumptions about what happened to a teenager who disappeared during a holiday celebration? The nature of Eve's final hours remained unclear. Where had she gone after being seen near the Cosmos Arcade? Who, if anyone, had she been with? Had she left voluntarily or been taken against her will? These fundamental questions about the last moments of her life remained unanswered. Final reflection. The case of Eve Shay demonstrates how some investigations never truly close, no matter what the official record states. For 15 years, Chief Carrie Hollis carried the weight of unanswered questions about her childhood friend's death. The personal cost of that burden, the toll on her relationships, her peace of mind, her ability to move forward, illustrates the complex position faced by investigators who have personal connections to their cases. The emergence of new information after so many years raises its own set of considerations. How reliable is evidence that surfaces more than a decade after the fact? How do investigators balance renewed hope for resolution against the reality that memories fade, physical evidence degrades, and witnesses may have motivations for speaking or remaining silent that have nothing to do with truth? The intersection of Brooke Lowry's presence at the Four Points Hotel with the renewed investigation into Eve's death highlights how secrets can compound over time. Brooke's affair, which she believed was a private matter separate from any criminal investigation, became entangled with a murder inquiry and potentially with the 15-year-old mystery of her childhood friend's disappearance. The decision she and David made to remain silent about what they heard understandable from one perspective. indefensible from another exemplifies the moral complexity that often surrounds true crime cases. For those who followed this case, the question remains, what actually happened to Eve Shay on that 4th of July 15 years ago? Was her death truly an accident, or was there something more sinister at work? And if the latter, does the recent murder at the Four Points Hotel hold the key to understanding what happened all those years ago? The investigation continues. Files remain open, and somewhere, perhaps, someone knows the full truth about what happened to a teenager who vanished from a pier on a summer night, whose body washed ashore weeks later, and whose case has refused to rest for 15 years. Some cases demand resolution, no matter how much time has passed. The question is whether resolution is still possible, or whether too many years, too many secrets, and too many silences have made the truth permanently inaccessible. For Carrie Hollis, the pursuit continues. The file that she nearly closed remains on her desk, and the voice on that anonymous call distorted but insistent echoes with a promise or a threat that after 15 years, the truth about Eve Shay may finally be within reach. Or perhaps, it will slip away once more into the depths, like a body carried out by the tide. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.